Great, thank you, everyone. Our next presenting company is BioCardia. BioCardia recently completed a reverse merger into Tiger X Medical, which is one of Phil Frost's companies. BioCardia is focused in the cardiac medicine space with both cell therapy products as well as medical devices to deliver them. And here to present for the company is Peter Altman, President and CEO. And I believe Peter's going to walk through a couple of slides, and then I'll moderate a Q&A. But if there are any questions from the audience, don't hesitate to wave, and we'll try to bring you into the conversation as well.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Here's the standard safe harbor statement. And so the company highlights here distilled on this page. Fundamentally, we have two cell therapies, our CardiAmp, and the AMP stands for autologous minimally processed cell therapy, which is currently in a pivotal trial here in the United States for the treatment of New York Heart Association class 2 and 3 ischemic heart failure. What's unique about that program is it has a companion diagnostic to select patients who are likely to respond to therapy. And then the cells and the technology are all used at point of care to provide therapy in a one-time treatment. That program is ongoing now in the United States. We have a second program, which is an allogeneic mesenchymal stem cell program that we're intending to have a revised chemistry, manufacturing, and controls available for an IND in beyond the 2018 window. And essentially, that's built on the three mesenchymal stem cell trials we've co-sponsored to date. And both of those are enabled by a product portfolio we have for delivery and cell processing. So focusing on CardiAmp, really it involves 4 separate steps. The patients who are screened with a potency assay at baseline, which is a biomarker panel that's run in a CLIA-CAP lab, are then pass an inclusion criteria, which is based on an analytical score, and they are eligible for therapy. The therapy occurs in a cardiac catheterization setting in a procedure that can be scheduled well in advance. And essentially, the 3 steps take a total of roughly 60 to 90 minutes to perform. We harvest the cells, which is around 60 cc's of cells from one iliac crest, typically the opposite iliac crest from where we've done the pre-procedure marrow potency assay. The cells are processed in an FDA-cleared CE-marked point-of-care cell processing platform for essentially concentrating out the mononuclear cell prep in those cells. And then the cells are delivered with a CE-marked delivery system intramyocardially, such that the patient will ultimately be able to be discharged on the same day. And there's some nice advantages in the cost of goods related to this therapy, as well as its ease in the clinical setting. And so this is being advanced in a 40-center trial in the United States to date. There's been press that has come out from 2 sites, Johns Hopkins and the University of Wisconsin. So as we look at our phase 2 data, so this is a device. This is regulated by the FDA as a device, regulated by CBER as a device. And it actually has 3 separate components: the diagnostic, the cell processing, and the delivery system. And so as we look at the endpoint in the pivotal trial ahead, we're looking at a 6-minute walk endpoint, which is really a composite between that functional capacity metric and mortality and MACE. And what I'm showing here on this slide is a comparison of 6-minute walk, which is our primary endpoint, and the device trials that have historically been approved with a 6-minute walk endpoint, as well as other therapies that have been in development. And on the right, you're seeing one of our secondary endpoints, quality of life. You're seeing our results from our phase 2 trial, which was a 30-patient randomized placebo-controlled trial. So the phase 2 had p-values of less than 0.05 for both the 6-minute walk readout and the quality of life readout, which is why we've been driving to select those for our phase 3 trial. So with that behind us, we are enrolling and planning to advance the CardiAllo program soon after CardiAmp completes enrollment. We're expecting top-line data for CardiAmp in 2019. I note that later this year, we will submit another IDE, that's investigational device exemption, to the FDA for CardiAmp for another indication. We had our feasibility data set reported out in March of 2016. And what's unique about the IDE process is with a Category B designation, we have Medicare reimbursement for this trial. So even though we're running a pivotal heart failure trial, the cost to us to perform that trial are rather modest. And we are looking at other opportunities ahead for CardiAllo and other indications as well. So here is our catalyst going forward. Fundamentally, our main driver right now is the CardiAmp IDE trial. We're expecting to detail an interim analysis likely in one of the upcoming quarters. We have the post-acute infarction IDE pathway. We'll have our IDE submission in to the FDA this year. And then we're not detailing the timeline for the CardiAllo program, but it will follow the CardiAmp heart failure program.
Great. And I guess picking up, if I may, firstly, the phase 2 data that you showed, was that large enough to give you confidence in powering the phase 3 on 6-minute walk? And has the agency signed off on 6-minute walk as the primary endpoint? I assume yes, but I want to understand that because a lot of times they'll require, as we discussed, MACE or hospitalization for the primary. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that discussion.
Yeah, so it's really a risk-benefit equation for the agency. In our phase 2, which was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, we had a p-value of less than 0.05. So if you think about our phase 3, which we're trying to replicate this, we have an order of magnitude larger trial. So it's very well powered. In fact, the size of the trial was driven primarily by what the agency would require to grant an approval. The agency accepted the 6-minute walk, which has been used, as we know, for pulmonary hypertension, as well as some of the early cardiac resynchronization therapy trials for heart failure. But they accepted in part because of how we detailed it as a composite endpoint, so that there's missing values when a patient has a MACE event. There's missing values when there's a death. And so by looking at it in the fashion that we did, I think they accepted it as a composite endpoint.
That's really interesting.
One last thing is the agency's primary interest, I think, was what are you going to do about repeat dosing? And there's been a lot discussed around that. And we do expect that to be an issue, but it'll be a subsequent trial we'll have to run.
What about does having a diagnostic with a cell type and a catheter for implantation, does that increase the regulatory challenges, or are there some ways that it kind of comes as a package that maybe actually helps the FDA? I wanted to kind of ask about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a little tricky because there's different groups at the agency who regulate these things. And the agency has been fabulous to interact with. I have a lot of respect for them on how they are able to provide guidance without telling you the source of all of their guidance. So the diagnostic that we're utilizing, they value it. For them and for many others in the field, you know, it's viewed as a no-brainer to a degree because, you know, wow, you're selecting patients that have high CD34 counts, for example. That's one of our five biomarkers. It makes enormous sense. And we're excluding patients with poor source tissue who are unlikely to be responsive. So the agency found that attractive. The fact that the cell processing and the delivery technology are already approved in Europe, not for a specific heart failure indication, you know, buys them comfort. And then our delivery platform, which, you know, is probably the highest risk element of the procedure because it is an autologous therapy procedure, the agency has seen that already in, I think, 8 or 9 other trials. Right. So they're very comfortable with BioCardia and interactions in trials.
Because your catheter is being used by other companies to deliver the cells.
Correct. And we've also co-sponsored quite a few trials ourselves.
Yeah. Excellent. Question from the audience, please. And the question was, because it's a decentralized processing approach, are there any challenges with respect to release by the local administrator?
None, actually. The potency assay provides a first gate for quality control, which is done separate from the procedure. And then there's some things that we're doing in the trial itself to lay down the data set so that the agency will be comfortable with it broadly. But we haven't detailed those things that we're doing. But we don't expect any issues. I mean, this is really designed as a therapy that can be used in every interventional cardiology suite in the world in a straightforward fashion.
That's a great question. Another question, please. And actually, here comes a microphone for you.
Really, the cells are minimally manipulated, but this is a non-homologous indication. This was not an impediment that the agency allowed you to go via device when giving the cells in a non-homologous indication?
Yes.
That's interesting.
I agree. So I wanted to ask a little bit too, in the time that we have left, to talk about the transition from auto to allo and really sort of what the benefits are and why that makes sense for BioCardia.
Yeah, so we're excluding patients with the pre-procedure marrow potency assay. And so that is actually a considerable amount of patients that won't really qualify for the CardiAmp therapy. In our history, we've co-sponsored a number of trials. In fact, I think the only head-to-head trials for different cell therapies in the setting of heart failure. So our initial TAC-HIF trial compared essentially the CardiAmp cells to an autologous mesenchymal stem cell prep. The subsequent Poseidon trial compared autologous mesenchymal cells to allogenic mesenchymal cells. And the ongoing and Trident trial that is not yet reported out looks at different doses in the allogenic prep. We've had some insights along the way on the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, and we're currently revising those to essentially upgrade the allogenic program. And it's a unique strategy for a company to have multiple therapeutic candidates in the same indication. And what we've realized is that the allogenic makes sense for the patients that will not respond to CardiAmp. They could actually, in a larger population, be better. There will be some patients that don't want to have a bone marrow aspiration, some physicians that won't want to have a bone marrow aspiration. And so we, who are going to have this very large engine in a heart failure setting clinically, CardiAllo will likely come right behind CardiAmp and will be a very quick, large phase 2b trial that we expect will give us very interesting insights of whether to continue the development of CardiAllo.
Helpful. And then just going back for 1 second, you mentioned the IDE for CardiAmp with respect to expanding the potential patient population beyond heart failure to post-MI. Maybe you can just comment on those market differences and maybe on the patient health differences or the underlying biology differences.
Yeah, so everybody who's treated acute infarction with cell therapy historically is focused on an intracoronary artery approach, which for small cells such as the mononuclear cells in CardiAmp has inferior efficiency of delivery. For larger cells, there's always the issue of cells aggregating and causing occlusive effects intracoronary. And because our delivery system is so safe, we advanced a phase 1 feasibility trial, open label, on 9 patients in Europe and had some really fabulous readouts. We're currently partnered with an organization, Cell Prothera, running a second randomized placebo-controlled trial for CD34 cells in Europe called the Excellent Trial, and that's also in the acute setting. And so the idea is to advance CardiAmp under an IDE and advance that as a second program for BioCardia. I note that one of the advantages of the IDE pathway is not just that it is one pivotal trial, but under the category B, we have Medicare reimbursement, both for standard of care follow-up and for the actual devices themselves. in the trial because of the safety profile we've provided.
Excellent. Well, that's a really helpful update. Peter, I appreciate you being here. A lot of progress you guys have made over the last year, and we look forward to following the phase 3 trial and see how it reads out.
Thank you, Ted.